Good afternoon, all. This is the NTC podcast. We are on episode 65, sponsored by Sports Business Classroom. Aaron Washington, Colin, fellow contributor of NTC, special guest Mike Vorkunov of The Athletic. Mike's been hard at work today. Today is the opt-out deadline for the two sides for the CBA negotiations, owners and the Players Association. Mike's got the inside scoop on a lot of important stories as it pertains to the CBA negotiations. So Mike, sorry it had to be such a busy day for you, man. I know you kind of been scrambling, but in any case, we're glad to have you on. Thanks for taking the time. And, hope everything has been, other than the crazy day, going well on your end.
Yeah. Happy to finally do this and happy to come on with you guys.
Yeah, we always love having the insiders, the guys that are, in the trenches, getting the news and, digging up these news stories for us. So always a good time. We appreciate it. This is a big day. I'm glad that we're recording this podcast on March 31st. This is as I noted before, the CBA opt-out deadline, which was extended twice already. It was initially supposed to be December 15th. But it got pushed back to today, and the sides, I guess, just as of not even an hour ago, was reported that the two sides are still at work trying to hammer out an agreement. As of now, we're not sure if that's going to happen, but the two sides are obviously motivated to get this show on the road, get something agreed to, so we don't run into a situation like we did in 2011. We had a lockout situation. But essentially, if there's no deal reached today, the two sides do have the option of opting out. And then the current CBA would expire on June 30th. So the sides would still have 3 months to negotiate a new agreement. But of course, that's when the clock really starts, and we'd be looking at a situation where a lockout is possible. So, Mike, you've obviously been up close and personal with this news, with these negotiations. They've been ongoing for several months here. And just curious to hear your perspective on this. Are you confident that a deal is going to be reached between the two sides? Obviously, revenue is up at sky high levels. The NBA is in a really good place, so the two sides want to get this done. But from what you've been hearing and what you can see, do you anticipate these two sides will come to an agreement before we hit the deadline, and then we're up against the clock where a situation where a lockout could be imminent?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a deadline today, right? I think there will be a deal. I don't know if it will be today. Today's kind of like I don't want to say a false deadline, but it's like deadline 1.0, because if they don't reach it today, the NBA has said that they intend to opt out of the current CBA. But then you still have through the end of June. So what's that? It's 3 more months that they still have time to negotiate, right, and reach a deal to avoid the actual lockout. So, I mean, it's not as if they don't come to a deal today, that's it. So it just means that the NBA probably then opts out unless they feel like they're so close they just want to have another day or two of an extension or something like that. But I think a deal will get done. I don't think we'll see a lockout. I think there's just been optimism from both sides. I feel like this is not an acrimonious type of negotiation. The NBPA and the NBA are not in that space anymore, right? Tamika Tremaglio and Adam Silver are not at loggerheads with one another like previous commissioners and NBPA executive directors have been in the past. So I don't think it's like trending towards anything like that. I don't think we'll see something like 2011. I think a big reason for that is just basically that the money's not at stake here, right? They're pretty agreed upon the BRI split, and so if the BRI split is not something that's up for, as part of the conversations, everything gets easier from there, right? Once you get the money figured out, it's easier to go from there. So I think we'll get a deal done. I'm not going to predict when it is. I don't know if it'll be by the end of today or in the sometime in the next few weeks or whatever to come. But I think it'll happen eventually.
And do you have any? I read your article from a couple of days ago, and it seemed like in your article, kind of the main piece that was kind of causing the delay. I'm sure there's plenty of issues, but the big change is the landscape as far as the media rights. How does that kind of relate as far as the big change in the media landscape and the rights, how they're going to change from streaming and the regional rights and all those things? How does that kind of correlate as far as the CBA and why that might stall things?
Well, I think that has an impact on the revenue, right? The national TV deal obviously is talked about in terms of its kind of sum total, whatever that number eventually becomes in the end, starting in 2025. And I think the more interesting mechanics will be of how that gets all done. How much is going to be on broadcast TV, how much on cable, how much on streaming, how much not only the national rights in America, right? But we're talking internationally, North America, Europe, the whole world and everywhere that the NBA gets its money from for its TV revenue. And so I think part of that will be up to, kind of maybe based on what Adam Silver was saying this week. I think they just want to figure out a way to count TV revenue and to how that money is allocated, how they can get revenue in the door, right? Like compared to the last CBA, which was in 2017, we see so many more ways now to broadcast games, right? Like the last TV deal, it was Turner, it was ESPN. Like ESPN and Turner now have their own streaming networks. We don't see NBA games on there, right? So it's just, even something as simple as like, hey, will this be on ESPN Plus? If it is, how do we account for that? Will this be on, just throwing some random stuff out there. Like, will this be on an app somewhere? Like all these things you have to figure out how to monetize that, who gets the revenue, how that revenue is split, all these things, and what goes into BRI. I think they're trying to figure that out. It's just a totally new media landscape in every single way. And so I think, especially as this comes right during this big upheaval in the local RSN market, that's not great timing in terms of trying to figure out what the next governing agreement for the league will look like. And so I think they're just trying to figure that out. It's clear that the league wants a new CBA rather than going another season under this current one. And so I think they're the ones driving kind of making sure there's a deal in place now rather than later. And again, we'll see what happens and how quickly this gets done. But I think it'll get done at some point in the near future.
Yeah. Do you think that as far as the, because the national media rights are up at the end of the 24-25 season. So do you think they're trying to kind of figure this out to plan ahead? Because it's kind of interesting. It's like this CBA is going to obviously define what's happening there. So maybe they're trying to figure out, a contingency plan for what's going to happen in the future is basically what they're trying to figure out.
I think part of it's timing. I think they want to have the CBA in place before they go into the TV deal negotiations, right?
Yeah,
two very big things. So they want to get, the CBA in place, then they can move on to the TV deal negotiations, right? Or the broadcast rights negotiations, really. Media rights negotiation. So I think that's part of it. So they can get this done and move on. I think it would be hard to try to do, let's say if this goes on for another year, if they were to play under this next CBA, right? You're then negotiating into next season. And that's possibly at a time where they have to start having all these discussions about what the next media rights deal looks like. I don't think just because the next deal starts in the summer of 2025 or, with the start of 25-26 season, that the NBA wants to be negotiating it, through the conclusion of the 24-25 season. So I think they want to be able to get all these things done as quickly as possible so they can just move on to the next thing. And then obviously, once you're able to allocate in a CBA, how the revenue is accounted for, how it's distributed, what all the sources are, it probably for the NBA makes it a lot easier to figure out what kind of deals it wants to do and what formats and where the revenue is all coming in as they're trying to figure out the different offers and what the marketplace looks like for them. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, actually. Do you have any kind of sense of what the other bigger pieces of contention are? I heard, the AP was reporting some of them as far as the quote unquote upper spending limit, which is just the, having a cap. And then a couple of the others. Have you heard, what's still kind of the sticking points, or are there a lot of them still out there? Are they not really saying exactly what it is, or?
I think they're still talking about a lot of things. It's hard to say until the final agreement gets done. I don't think we're going to see a hard cap. I think that probably from the league side, they want to find a way. At this point, we're talking about disincentivizing some of the big spenders from spending so much, right? Like they want to make it a little more even across the board. So you don't have the outliers like the Warriors, like the Clippers, like we saw the Nets in previous years. So that's probably going to mean some kind of change in the luxury tax and the luxury tax penalties. And so we'll see where that all comes out in the end, probably in a way, again, to disincentivize those teams going over, $70 million over the luxury tax threshold or something like that. So we'll see that. I think those are kind of the big things. The league always wants to obviously keep spending in check, right? They want to create a more even playing field across the board, so to speak. The NBPA would never go for a hard cap. That's why that's always been kind of a non-issue this whole time. And I think the other things are more kind of ancillary, but usually it's the big things about how money is split that really divides really any league and any players union during a CBA negotiation.
For sure. I mean, obviously the upper limit is a concern. You want to curb the spending from those big time teams and those big markets. Correct me if I'm wrong. I also heard that there was talks about incentivizing teams that, typically don't want to spend into the tax at all. Those teams that want to completely avoid it. I believe there was talk about kind of curbing that penalty right into the tax. I believe it's like that 0 to like 400 or 4.9 million bracket, to encourage teams to maybe spend a little bit into the tax, but not necessarily have to avoid it altogether. Is that another consideration that might be coming into play here?
And that would make sense too, right? To make it less punitive for the teams that are just like a little bit over the tax, right? You don't want to make it just painful for a team that's $1 million over the tax as it is for a team that's $20 million over the tax, over the tax. Sorry. And I think maybe the goal here is to, again, disincentivize the really high spenders. And so if a team that's just a little bit over or just at that threshold isn't punished as much, that perhaps is a way to kind of reach some more agreement. Again, it's negotiation. You have to give and you have to take, right? To be able to trade off higher taxes on the higher spending teams, with smaller taxes, smaller hits for the teams that just go just a little bit over the luxury tax. Because again, I think at any point we only see maybe 10, I'll have to check, but like 10, no more than a dozen teams hit the tax every year, if I remember correctly off the top of my head.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. And it's interesting because this issue, as far as the tax spending and the penalties, that comes down so much more to team versus team than league versus players, right? I mean, you're talking about, the big market teams and their ability to spend versus the smaller market teams and, how they're going to be punished. It obviously affects the players overall, but it's really interesting because a lot of it is going to have to do with the infighting within the teams and what they think is fair more than just league versus players, which is really interesting too.
Yeah. I mean, the players get their BRI split either way, right? That's the whole point. Like that gets locked in with the CBA.
Right. Exactly.
When you have the luxury tax and all that, there's a benefit to the teams that don't spend too. They get cash outs, right?
Exactly.
Whenever they account for whichever teams are in the tax and figure out what the money is and all the, payments they have to make, like teams get paid out at the end of the year or, whenever their pay schedule is. And so, yes, it is a way really for the smaller market teams to be able to create some kind of more, I guess the argument would be more equal playing field. Although I don't know if sometimes having equal playing field for all 30 teams is something that they want anyway, because that could not turn out necessarily how they think it'll go. Then it becomes a question of competency instead of, how much you can spend, right? And the size of your market. And then you have other things to blame. So we'll see how that all comes out in the end.
Exactly. I think there's already like momentum towards that, that talk of parity and equal play across the league. I think that's something that is definitely encouraging. That's probably playing a part in these talks going as well as they are so far, at least from what we can tell. You look at those previous years, in the previous CBA, there were the juggernauts. There were the Lakers taking over the league. There were the Celtics taking over the league. Super teams were a big deal. The big threes of the world. It seems like that has kind of curbed down a little bit. Now you're seeing the Kings make a rise to prominence. The Memphis Grizzlies doing great things in the league. The New Orleans Pelicans, just naming a few. So with those teams in the status they are right now, just kind of rising, I think that is an encouraging sign that the league is in a good place. And you're not necessarily just seeing the teams that have the most money to spend, have the best seasons. It almost seems like it's the opposite. Like you have teams that spend big, and for the Clippers, it's like they don't look great right now. The Warriors, they're really struggling as well. So it's encouraging to see teams that are a little more frugal with their money and spend well and draft well, prosper, as opposed to just teams that want to go way into the tax and spend, like you said, like 60 or 70 million into the tax just to try to get a leg up on the competition.
Yeah, no, I don't think that spending a lot of money is any guarantee of success, right? There's still a lot more things at play. I don't know if every season will be like this one, especially in the West where it's so tight and when there is so much mediocrity. What do you have, like 12 teams that can still potentially get a playoff spot? But, we've seen in the past, small market teams have success. We saw the Thunder have a lot of success before everyone basically bolted, right? We've seen the Pacers had a lot of success. We've seen, a previous iteration of the Grizzlies have success, and we've seen big market teams have success. So there's a lot of things that go into having a really good team and winning a championship. The Warriors spent a lot of money, in each of the last 3 or 4 seasons, but one of those included like a 20-win team, a team that got knocked out in the play-in tournament, and then a team that won the title last year. And we see this year's team. We'll see what happens with this Warriors team, but right now they're not trending toward a championship again. The Clippers have spent a lot of money over the last 4 years, I want to say. What have they gotten for it, right? Like, so spending is no guarantee of big time success. Drafting well, developing, all those things really, really matter. I think what's happened is that because the cap has gone up and there is so much more money in the NBA now, there's probably a larger incentive for players to stay where they are because they can make so much money. And maybe it is a little more equal across the board in terms of which market you're in, that you're not losing as much money now just by staying in Oklahoma City because your NBA salary is so large and you don't have to chase perhaps marketing dollars somewhere else or be in a bigger market so you can have a bigger shoe contract or anything like that. That's just, kind of one theory of it. But yeah, I think we're in an interesting place now where there's just so much money that maybe it upends the natural order of things that we've seen in the, previous 20, 30, 40 years of the league's history.
Yeah. And my argument this whole time has been, a lot of the teams, their ability to go over the tax is kind of an incentive or a plus because they were able to build a roster in some way. Like they aren't able to just go out and sign every free agent that's out there. They have to find clever ways to build their roster beforehand. When we talk about the Warriors, yeah, they were able to sign Durant because the salary cap spiked. But other than that, it was all through their own roster building through the draft. And then they held on to their own guys because they're able to afford it. Like the Thunder could have done the same thing, right? If their market was bigger. So you're almost like saying, yes, you found these guys, you built up your own team, and now you can pay to retain them. And that's kind of what the luxury tax is saying. Like you can keep them, but you're just going to have to pay X amount of dollars for it. So that's why I don't really have a huge problem with the discrepancy because you're just paying to retain your own guys. It's almost a reward, but you still have to pay for it,
Yeah. And I want to bounce off that point, Colin, that you made because, you're talking about retaining your own players. And a big way to do that is through extension before they even hit the market. And I believe that's something else that was proposed is to raise that amount of money that you can offer to someone that's on your team that you have rights to an extension. Right now, I believe it's 120% of their current salary or their average NBA salary. I think if increasing that to 130, 140% would help teams in situations to where they sign players on a great contract, they outperform the contract, and they find themselves in a situation where extension would not net them as much money as if they went into free agency. So teams are at a risk of losing those players. So I think that's something else that I don't know if it's going to be agreed to, but I think would be beneficial for the league and those teams that make solid decisions, like Colin said, through the draft, just in order to give them a better chance to retain their players to continue success that they've found through having those players on their team.
Yeah, and I think that's mutually beneficial for both teams and players, right? Players are able to get paid quicker. They don't have to go all the way to free agency. They can sign extensions, the year out. And I think that, ultimately we'll see where it is. I think it was Arsham Sharani who reported that it might get to like 150 instead of the current 120. So I think that would be a situation that kind of solves for what happens with Jaylen Brown in the next few years, right? Like DeJounte Murray. And again, as you said, it helps teams retain those types of star level players a lot easier and not have to risk them going to free agency if you just give them the maximum extension that they can earn while they're still in your organization, before they hit free agency. And that's how you maintain your good teams, right? Is that you don't let them go to free agency. You don't let them potentially walk. And I think that in that scenario, that would be good for the team and the player. And you can see why they'd both be amenable to that kind of change to the CBA.
For sure. We're on this topic of building teams through the draft. Obviously, that's probably the quickest way to success. Like you said, Colin, you can't just sign every free agent that becomes available. Teams don't have the money for that. It's just not possible. But when you look at the draft specifically, it was just reported by Woj earlier today, right before we went on, that the proposed change in the one and done rule is being tabled for the time being. So it looks like that we're going to stick with the one and done rule. Players that are coming through the system, playing in high school, will still have to play at least 1 year, be 1 year removed from high school in order to be eligible for the draft, 18 years old. So I have some questions about that. I'm wondering why that might be the case. Mike, I wanted to get your perspective on this. If it is being tabled for the time being, I wonder what came up in those talks at the table to cause one side or the other to shy away from introducing this into the next CBA, at least for now. Why do you think that the sides might have decided to push that to another discussion and shy away from that after all the talks that it was going to become a thing in the next couple of years in the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens in the final agreement, right? But if that is the case where the one and done is retained, I think the only person who's been really driving it the last few years has been Adam Silver. You heard the NBPA last month say, okay, if you're going to do this, we'd still like to find a way to keep veterans on the roster, to not have an 18-year-old rookie come in and basically take a roster spot away from a 35-year-old vet or a 30-year-old vet or something like that. So they want to find a way to have flexibility on the roster, that if you have an 18-year-old go straight from high school to the pros, be able to retain the veterans that they think can, produce now, or obviously they want to retain, this being the NBPA, it's their job to protect the job. It's to protect the roster spots and jobs for the players that are currently in the league, more so than it is for the people who are potentially coming into the league, right? And so you understand why they'd want that kind of trade-off. And again, I never quite understood the push to go back to have the ability to go from high school to the NBA. And so maybe there just weren't enough constituents there to really make that thing a big push for either side.
Colin, do you have any thoughts? As to like what concerns might have been, introduced here, like some potential problems that would come up? Mike obviously stated one with those veterans, potentially finding some kind of, struggle to retain a roster spot. But does anything come to mind for you when it comes to, dealing with young players? I mean, there's a lot of concerns. These guys are 17, 18 years old. Obviously They make crazy decisions. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think now that they've made that decision in this rule, I think it comes back to what Mike was talking about, and a lot more of it is, hey, let's figure out the CBA and what we're doing with the money before we decide on what to do with adding more players who are basically going to be eligible to play in the NBA, because it's going to cause a lot more issues when all of a sudden we have a lot more players eligible for the draft and basically a lot more NBA ready players. So essentially what you have to start thinking about is what he's talking about. Now, all of a sudden, whatever issues are coming up against this deadline, as we're talking right now you're adding in, okay, now we have to figure out if we want to add, 2 more roster spots or 2 more two-way contracts, how much more money we want to give to these players. How can we make it, even up with the veterans? So you're adding in a lot more. So, I mean, just from a common sense standpoint, I would almost think you table that like they're doing now, come to an agreement, and then leave that as an issue that you can just amend the CBA moving forward in its existence. Not for even the next CBA, this one, a year or 2 down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, look, from the NBA side or from a team side, you could see how if the NBPA is insisting, like, hey, if you're going to have an 18-year-old who goes straight from high school, we don't want that to cost a job for a longtime veteran, right? Like, have essentially like a designated veteran spot on the roster somewhere, playing at no less than the minimum. That's going to cost the team money. You could see how they don't want to budge on that, and you just can't find an agreement to make that thing happen. And so you can just stick it in, somewhere down the line.
Right.
Get the CBA done, figure it out without an immediate, deadline hanging over you, right? And just say, hey, a year from now, we talked it over again. And we figured, hey, we want to do it this time, right? Like, These are all things, as we saw during the pandemic, right? The CBA can still be opened up a little bit, can still be negotiated a little bit.
Sure.
If you have the room to agree on something, you can always change the rules if both sides see fit.
Yeah, and again, just from a common sense standpoint, you talk about there's 30 picks in the first round. If all of a sudden some 18-year-olds are coming out, those picks at 25 to 30, now they're moving into the second round. So you're eliminating these 2-year guaranteed contracts for those guys too. They're getting pushed to the second round. So these kids who played for 4 years that might have been, getting 2-year guaranteed contracts are now being pushed into the second round. They might not even get a contract. They might be playing for a 2-way deal. So you got to think of it that way too.
That's true. There's so much more of an investment now as well when it comes to just draft picks in general. I went back and looked at the rookie salaries for first rounders. I looked at the number 1 pick in particular back in 17-18, and the salary for that player in year 1, and of course it escalates every year, but it was $5.8 million back in 17-18. You compare that to today, 2023. I mean, you can earn almost $10 million year 1 if you're a top overall pick. I mean, we're talking about full mid-level exception money as a rookie, your first year out. So imagine if those guys are, extremely talented, but if they fall somewhere in between the first through 5th pick, I mean, you're earning, $5+ million year 1. your total contract, I mean, it can be anywhere from, 30 to 40 million, 50 million just in those first 4 years of your contract. So, I mean, that's a lot of money to invest in players that would be 17, 18 years old, coming out of the draft for these franchises. So it's a big investment. I'm sure that a lot of people, at the table are looking at that and, they're like, I mean, it's already enough of a gamble on these guys that are 1 year removed from high school coming in, doing a one and done thing. But just imagine that multiplied by 10, with guys who are even younger and even more unproven and more risky. So I'm sure those factors also come into play when you're talking about having these guys come straight in as young as they are and as risky as they are with all the money involved.
Yeah, for sure. The resource allotment is a lot different now, especially with the 2017 CBA, which increased the rookie scale salaries, right? And so you have the financial resources you're investing into, the time aspect, the cost of a roster spot, like all these things are a lot bigger now. And obviously the G League is in a much better place now than it was a decade ago, but it's rare to see lottery picks, especially top lottery picks, go to the G League anyway.
Exactly. Well, at least we have the G League becoming more of a prominent resource for players. Whether you're a top pick, whether you're undrafted, it doesn't matter. It's looked at as more of a resource and opportunity as opposed to, back when it was the D League, where it was more of like a demotion. I just read an article recently about that, but that's also good. And they also already introduced the 2-way contract. So there are measures in place to help rosters accommodate more players, but, it's still going to be a challenge when that does become a thing in the new CBA or whenever it's introduced. It's going to be a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
But guys, we've talked all about the CBA and it's been all business. It's been a lot of serious, business up to this point. But of course, there's a flip side to the league. It's an entertainment league. It's not only as an entertainment, but it's business and entertainment. So what I wanted to do here, and this stems from an article that Mike, came out with not too long ago. I believe it was, a month and a half ago now. Was about, an all entertainment team. It's like we have these great players in the league and we're always talking about tiering players. Who's the best player at this position? Who is the MVP candidate and all this other stuff, X, Y, and Z. But what about those players that we want to just take a look at, not because they have the best skill set, most dominant, but just because they just put a smile on our face. And we go look at them and take a look at them and what they're made of and what they bring to the court, what they bring to their team. So, I wanted to split this into first and second team. And, there's going to be common names here that I'm sure we're both going to have. But, a couple of names for me just kind of get it started. Looking at two guards, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for one. He's not the most explosive. He's not the most, incredible athlete, but he's just so cunning. He's so shifty, and the way he applies himself in the court is incredible. He makes the most of every single movement. And then Ja's kind of like that antithesis of Shai. He's just quicker, more explosive, can jump higher. But every time you watch him on the court, you just want to jump out of your seat. Your jaw's on the floor. You're like, I've never seen something like that before. From a player that can just get up. He reminds me of Derrick Rose back in the day. In some aspects of the game. So just wanted to put those guys out there to kind of start it off. I also have a couple of other people. Bull, back in your article, you mentioned Bull. A few times actually here recently. He's an incredible athlete. He is just crazy in every sense of the word. And then you look at guys like I also have Mikal Bridges in here, and I have DeMar DeRozan just because of just their all-around games and the way their basketball IQ, it's so high, and they just do things that you wouldn't think could be seen on a basketball court. So
yeah, I mean, a guy like Jalen Brunson, I just love to watch. He's kind of more like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander than he is, like you said, John Morant. He's a land-based type of guard, a land-based type of player, but he's so smart. He's so shifty. He's so powerful despite not being super athletic that he really is just like a very fun version of just kind of that old school type of point guard who is more, more of a scoring guard who depends on his intelligence than he does his athleticism and still remains a high scoring guard. I love watching Jeremy Sohan play for Spurs. He's developed into a good offensive. Well, his offense has developed over the course of a year. I wouldn't call him a good offensive player yet, but he's kind of that point forward type. I think he's a smart passer. I love his attitude, just the way that he really, really tries to get under the skin of the people that he's playing against. And you've seen this from time to time, like Markieff Morris and Alperen Sengun for the Rockets is really fun for me. He's just such a great passer, and maybe he gets forgotten a bit in that Rockets offense when you have Kevin Porter Jr. and you have
Jalen Green, and then obviously Jabari Smith is there as a rookie, though he's not a big central offensive hub yet. But Şengün to me is just like a really fun guy who's a great passer. And I think passing is really fun and it's very entertaining, and someone who just loves basketball. I love great passers. I love great passing big men. And I think that just, I don't know, increases the watchability of any game that you're watching any night.
You threw out some really good picks, and I almost want to say we can use the Rockets as an example of this all-entertainment team. The whole roster is just full of guys that bring joy to the court. I know the season hasn't been very smooth. It's been up and down. They've taken a lot of losses, but like you said, Jalen Green, KPJ, Şengün in particular, I think like he is he's almost like he's trying to take after Jokic a little bit with his skill set and the way he sees the court. But early in the season, I circled them as a team that I wanted to see play every night, not because they moved the ball the most or because they had the best chance of winning, but because they had players across the roster that just make you just say, wow, that's incredible. On the fast break, Kenyon Martin, another guy that's just like, wow, he's breathtaking, just absolutely incredible. So I love all those picks for sure. Jalen Brunson, I can't say enough good things about him. He's one of the leaders in, he gets to the paint at will. His paint touches, I'm sure, are near the top of the league. That short mid-range area, like 4 to 6 feet from the basket, he's just insane. His percentages are crazy. I think Kurt Goldsberry put out a graph of his percentages from every area of the court, and they were either orange or red, like all the way inside the paint in the mid-range area. It's just insane. So definitely some great picks.
All right, I didn't know all the parameters here, so I don't know if they're supposed to be able to play together. Like we're building a roster, so I'm just going straight 5, entertaining when I turn on the TV. All right,
it's a positionless league anyway, so
exactly.
I won't talk any points.
All right, number 1, Ja Morant. You just have to go Ja Morant. I think that just explains itself. I mean, anytime he's on, you have to stop and watch. Obviously, we talk about him all the time, Damian Lillard. I wish he was on a different team or a better team. But even on the poor Portland Trail Blazers, he puts on a show. I'll mix it up. I'll go back to the Grizzlies for a different reason. Let's watch Dillon Brooks. Anytime he's around, things get interesting, right? And
sure.
With Dillon Brooks, put on the same team, Draymond Green. For very different reasons, right? Let's see what happens when both of them are on the same team, on the same court, defending, I don't know, any other player. It would be very, very interesting to watch. That's 4. And then I have too many point guards. I was going to go SGA, but let's go Zion. I mean, it's terrible that we've missed so much of him this year, but man, he's someone that he just needs to get healthy. When they were up there at the 3 seed or 2 seed and they were just rolling when he was on the court, it seemed like that he just finally found his rhythm with that team. And again, he was someone that anytime they were on TV, you had to stop and watch. And hopefully he can get back for the playoffs. But man, hopefully he can have a full season next year and we can watch 82 games of him into the playoffs.
Yeah, those guys are all fun. I had no complaints. It's hard to like nitpick, and just be like,
right.
No, this guy, he sucks. I hate watching him play. And I think that's actually like a testament to how interesting it is to watch almost every team. There's some teams I have trouble watching, but almost every team on a night-to-night basis.
Really? I mean, every team, even the bad ones, for the most part, you can say, it's interesting to watch this guy and that guy.
Right. Yeah, I think the only teams I can't really watch right now are probably the Hornets since LaMelo went out.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Aaron, I know you said you like the Rockets. I can't do the Rockets. There's just not enough ball movement.
Yeah, it's a lot of ISO. That's fair.
Yeah, I mean the Blazers without Damian Lillard are a little
the Blazers are just
although Shaedon Sharpe is great.
Yeah.
From an entertainment factor.
That's true. Yeah, Shaedon Sharpe is incredible. I still think we were robbed with his absence from the dunk contest. He needs to enter next year just to give us that treat. I think he owes us that.
Maybe he's just building that pipe for next year.
No, exactly. He's just gonna. Although that could backfire because LeBron did that for about 10 years before he finally gave up. So hopefully it doesn't end up like that.
Yeah.
But those guys are all great choices. If we're talking about a second team, I mean, these are interchangeable. So I mean, it's very subjective. But Dame, Colin, you had him. He was almost my first team. He's second team. But just like, I mean, if you take Curry out of the equation, like, is there another player that could do what he does from over 30 feet from the basket? Like, I don't know if there is another player. There are hardly any in history, honestly, what he's done from a long range perspective. So I think he warrants inclusion here. But I think an underrated part of his game, aside from 3-point shooting, is the fact that he can get to the rim so often and just be so proficient there. I watch him in triple threat situations when he's sizing up the opponent, and he has one of the best first steps, I think, of any player in the league. Lightning quick first step. When we're talking about draft prospects, that's one of like the main keys I find when it comes to like one-on-one creation is like, how good is this guy at getting by his defender with like 1 or 2 dribbles, 1 or 2 steps? And I think Lillard does that extremely well. So I wanted to put him here for those reasons. How about Devin Booker? Just his skill set offensively. I don't know how you contain him one-on-one. Just looking at what he does. He also gets to the rim very well. And he's just so creative. Like when he's trying to get a shot off, it's like there's almost nothing you could do to prevent him from getting at least a decent shot off.
And now with KD back, did you see just how much space he has to work? I mean, yeah. KD had a horrible shooting night when he came back, but Book, I mean, he just has so much space to work with now. That's going to be a scary team.
It's absurd. Like, what do you do when Booker has all that space to work with? That's why he was going crazy in those 3 games that KD came back before he got hurt again. He's just insane to stop one-on-one. I rounded it out with Paul George. I think he's one of the best ball handling players of all time, like 6'9" or taller. Just, I mean, his handles are at least like he has a handle of almost like a Kyrie Irving, almost on that level, but at 6'8", 6'9". Pascal Siakam. I mean, people want to hate on him because he's always doing his spin move or whatever, but I mean, aside from that, he has a pretty deep bat for someone his size. And then I went a different route here. This isn't an all-star. It isn't an all-NBA player. It's not even a franchise player. I went Naz Reid in the second team for my center. He's out with a broken wrist now, which is very unfortunate. But, I mean, like, he's dunking on somebody. He's out here hustling, getting boards. Or he's just straight up hitting threes, like off the dribble or spot-up threes. It's just incredible what he can do from the center position. So, wanted to change it up a little bit, but I think those guys, all 5, just insane entertainment value for various reasons, and that's why they're most of these guys are all-time greats. So just want to throw that out there. What do you guys got for some other players? If we're talking about a second team, do you have another 5? It doesn't have to be position. I went position. I tried to be formal with this, but no such rules here.
Yeah, I mean, when I had my all fun team, I had Shaedon Sharpe on there. We talked about Jose Alvarado.
I like that.
Josh Giddey, again, I love passing, so I love great passers. Yeah. Nick Claxton is really fun to watch because of defense. He's a little more aggressive now in transition, just even handling the ball, which I think has added a different dimension to him. And Aaron Gordon, obviously, such a great cutter. They play so well off of Jokic, and if you get him in transition, he's just like unbelievable. We saw what he did to Landry Shamet, obviously. I think he's like top 6 in the league in dunks, something like that. So that'll probably be my next 5.
Hey, Mike, I was actually at that game when he detonated over Landry Shamet. I think it was on Christmas.
Yeah.
I was there, and I can't tell you how electric that arena was. So
he's in Shamet basketball heaven. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I ended up going. So De'Aaron Fox, man, he's been awesome this year. That whole team, I'm so pumped that they're in the playoffs. I mean, that place is going to be awesome and rocking. And he's just had such a great season. He's so young, and man, he's been so clutch for them. So I would love to see them make a run. No one is picking them to go far in the playoffs, and it would just be awesome if they did. It would be great. And he's just so much fun to watch. SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he'd probably be on my first team. I just picked so many point guards that I put him on my second team. But, man, every time he has the ball, you just don't know. You just assume he's going to take it to the rack, and you don't know what's going to happen. But he's had just an unbelievable year just carrying that team. He's been awesome. Luka, man, I mean, they've had a really rough second half here, really rough season. But, again, anytime it's in his hands, any game, you don't know what he's going to do. 60-point triple-double. He's been awesome. Steph, again, I'm from Boston, so it was tough to watch last year in the finals. But man, he's just a special guy, and you know, the general public doesn't give enough credit for how much he works without the ball. Luka's the opposite. He works with the ball, but man, the way that Steph runs around and gets his shots without the ball is special to watch. And then to round it out, I'll go something a little different and go Rob Williams when he's healthy, and just the explosion that he has on defense. And then, you know, Rob Williams on the offensive side, it's fun to watch. It comes out of nowhere.
Had to throw in that Boston pick, Colin.
Well, I had to throw something. I feel like Tatum and Brown are too obvious. So
that's fair. That's fair. That's totally understandable. I mean, you know, I thought about including a Heat guy here. I almost went Bam for my second team. I think he's another great pick.
It's a good one
because he brings a guard/wing skill set almost from the center position.
Mm-hmm.
He slowed down over the past few weeks. Tragically, you know, the Heat, the team's been in a tailspin of sorts. But when you look at what he could do for the mid range, his defensive capabilities, I just wish he would space the 4 to 3. Like if he added that component to his game, I'm not sure what defenses would be able to do with him. If he can just take that step out, shoot 37, 38%, I think he's capable.
If anyone on the team could, they need someone else to be able to do it.
They have to. That offensive rating is just hideous. It's absolutely hideous. So that's definitely a rough one. Well, guys, to wrap this up, we actually just got a notification from Woj here about 4 minutes ago that they're progressing on talks on a new long-term agreement. And it seems like a deal is near between the two sides. So isn't that great timing? You know, we can end off this pod on a positive note that the sides will probably come to agreement today before the midnight opt-out deadline. So just want to throw that in there for a little bit of good news to kind of top things off. But I think that's about it, guys. Mike, hey, I want to thank you again. We want to thank you again for joining us for this podcast. Always a great time speaking with insiders like yourself, and people that are part of the media realm of the game. It doesn't matter what area of the game you serve in. You do great work. We love having you here. So all the best going forward, and thanks for joining us.
Make sure to read him on The Athletic. He does some great articles on there.
That too. Subscribe to The Athletic, guys. Be sure to do that.
Thanks, guys, for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. Guys, don't forget about our website, notradeclause.com. We're not quite The Athletic now, but we're hoping that pretty soon we can get there. We're working on it. Our website is here. If you're watching this on YouTube, notradeclause.com is where you can find our cap sheets, draft capital page. We have articles on there. We'll be updating this as we get into the summer free agency and the draft, so don't miss out on the most up-to-date content when it comes to details around the league in the game of basketball. So we'll be signing out here for today, guys. Thanks so much for joining us again and tuning into this episode. We'll be back here real soon with another installment. But until then, enjoy the rest of your day, guys, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.